The following presentation is brought to you through the power of science.
Ooh, shiny.
Welcome to Generations Geek, a more or less family-friendly celebration of all that is geeky. I'm science fiction writer Scott Pearson, and along with my daughter Ella, we are two generations of geek. This is episode 50, Man on the Moon. Science fiction writer William Leisner joins me to review the Neil Armstrong biopic First Man and compare it with a couple of classic space program movies, The Right Stuff and Apollo 13. Ella was busy at college in London during the recording of this episode, but she nevertheless managed to Skype in for a Doctor Who segment featured at the end of the episode. Remember, you can find us online at generationsgeek.com, including blog posts from me and handy links to all our episodes. Plus, check out the Generations Geek Instagram, featuring Ella's geeky adventures. Now, on with the show. William Leisner, welcome to Generations Geek.
Thank you for having me.
So we've just seen First Man in the theater.
Yes.
Did you have any immediate thoughts, what you thought about this film?
It's really a real departure from what we've seen in the past with other Hollywood takes on the space exploration and the history of NASA and the astronauts. It's...
You seem a bit tepid on it.
I am tepid on it.
Okay.
Tepid is a good word for it. Yeah, I mean, I honestly was not impressed.
Oh, interesting.
It was a very well made film. It was very well made, technically, visually, it was very good. But I just had no feel for Ryan Gosling as Neil Armstrong.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Whether it's good interesting or bad interesting, because Neil Armstrong was famous for being an introspective, quiet, introverted guy.
Mm-hmm.
He never said much about being the first man on the moon. So in some ways, he's like the last guy you expect to see a movie made about. And it stayed true to that. Gosling's performance was very understated. It was very internalized. And so it is not a movie that's as easily accessible as some of the other films. For context, we both recently rewatched The Right Stuff and Apollo 13.
Mm-hmm.
And those are much more traditional, outgoing, accessible characters. And so... yeah, it is a really different take and much more quiet than a lot of people. Quiet dramatically, not quiet in the sound mix.
No, not quiet in the sound mix. That's for certain.
Because it really puts you vibrating in the capsule with the astronauts. But
like you were saying, I mean, yes, he was, famously very introverted. He was not very outgoing. But even when you have him in family situations, with his wife and with his kids, he's still this very stoic, very unemotional person. He never really expresses himself. I assume that we're going to be free with spoilers.
yes,
So
spoil away.
The film starts.
They make it to the moon.
Yes, they make it to the moon. They make it back. But early on in the film, we also have Neil and Janet's young daughter, Karen, die. She has some kind of cancerous brain tumor, died at a very young age. I'm not sure what, in reality, what age she had died at. But that was, right up at the top of the movie and given as a very important emotional piece of his life, which carries through the entire movie. And we do see him get emotional, and we do see him get, mourning his daughter, for, early on and then throughout the rest of his life. But we don't really get any other kind of emotion. I mean, there's one moment during the Gemini 8 mission when they have the successful docking, he actually smiles, and he actually, shakes hands with his co-pilot. So he has a small moment of celebration there before everything goes, wacky doodle and upside down. But really, I mean, just throughout the film, it's just so quiet that it's like, why are we even filming this? It's like, what is actually, as harsh as that sounds?
Yes. Well, no, I completely understand that reaction. I actually quite enjoyed the film and enjoyed, well, maybe enjoyed isn't quite the right word, but I mean, I just found, I mean, obviously he was very understated and he gives a very internalized performance, and I think you can easily argue that it was too internalized. But somehow, for some reason, I found it very compelling to watch him. And I mean, it's all kind of projection because you have to kind of imagine what he's going through because
Right.
you see that he's, and there are scenes here and there that do illuminate how haunted he is by his daughter's death. There's the one scene where one of the other astronauts comes to see him after he's left a funeral for some of the other astronauts that died in a plane crash, and to try to talk to him, and he just totally shuts it down and says, do you think I left the funeral because I wanted to talk to someone? Do you think I came out here because I wanted to talk to someone? He is psychologically incapable, it seems, of talking to anyone, his family included, about the pain that he carries. And so I found that compelling, although I'm not sure if I can explain why.
Well,
which is why I understand completely your reaction.
And probably because he's Neil Armstrong. He's the guy who was the first man on the moon. And
yeah.
This famous figure who we never really did get inside of his brain while he was alive.
Yeah.
And, probably that's why it's compelling to actually see not him, but this representation of him up on the screen reacting to, this mission or to this death or to this failed mission. But this is a movie, and when you're going to do a movie that is, essentially a biography of this person, you expect to see a little more depth, a little more, even though he was not a demonstrative man.
Mm-hmm.
You expect in a fictionalized biopic to at least get a little bit of that. He would have a moment with his wife. He would have a moment with his sons. He would have a moment with, his buddies
Mm-hmm.
in the astronaut corps.
Yeah. Instead, you watch this quiet man just, face the challenges with his reserve, and maybe it is just my nostalgia for the space program that infused my enjoyment of the film. Because, actually, if you step back and try to imagine someone who goes to this film just because, some young fan of Ryan Gosling, perhaps,
Yeah.
would it carry them through the film? I don't know, because maybe for me it was more about reliving these past glories and seeing the challenges. And even though you don't get into his emotions, you do get to sort of physically, viscerally experience the challenges that they faced with the technology of the time period in a way that you didn't. I mean, like in The Right Stuff, that's such a raw movie. It's very brightly lit. Everything is, even when there's horrible tragedies happening, it's, all very positive. And you watch like some of the early flights trying to break the sound barrier, and you're just watching the ship like whiz crazily, past the screen like a ridiculous amount of time. Quite frankly, it's like 15 shots of something whizzing past the screen again.
Yes, that's...
Where in this one, when you see Neil Armstrong on an X-15 flight early in the film, it's you sense the claustrophobia, the danger, I mean, it just seems like the thing is shaking apart around him, and it's so gritty compared to the approach that the Right Stuff took.
Yeah.
Or even Apollo 13, although I would kind of put Apollo 13 kind of in the middle of those two films, where Apollo 13 was more grounded and realistic than the Right Stuff,
Yeah.
but then that it's a whole further step to go to where First Man is.
Well, Apollo 13 has the benefit of being about a single mission. You know, it really does have a beginning, middle, and end in the historical background,
Yeah.
whereas in the Right Stuff, you're covering 15 years of history from Chuck Yeager up to Gordo Cooper's final Mercury flight, and in this one we're covering from I think it's 63 that it starts up to the moon landing, and it's a bunch of different missions that they're covering.
Yeah, so in that way, this is another interesting comparison of the three. Right Stuff is trying to tell so much stuff.
Too much stuff.
And First Man is a little bit more focused, but you still have an arc of his career. And then when you get to Apollo 13, that has a little bit of setup at the beginning, but it's primarily just focused on that one mission. And that's where I think both Apollo 13 and First Man are a little bit more accessible, even though you have such a quiet lead in First Man, in that because they're more focused, you really do get these characters more close up, as opposed to Right Stuff that kind of has to flutter around.
Well, yeah, I mean, Right Stuff has the problem where it's just too unfocused.
Yeah.
As I was rewatching it recently, it occurred to me, you know, we were just talking about this before we started recording, about had we seen this all the way through previously, and did we actually watch it all the way through? And it struck me as I was watching it this recent time, is like, this really plays like binging a multi-episode limited series.
Yeah.
Because there's the Chuck Yeager episode, and then there is the early test pilot episode, and then there's the Sputnik and the recruiting episode. So it really feels, if they were to ever redo the Right Stuff, they would do it as a 10 episode Netflix series. Whereas 30 some years ago, they had to do a 3-hour movie, and from what I've read, it could have been a 5 or 6 hour movie from what they had shot.
Yeah, well, it was a huge book, and yeah, so it's that Right Stuff. The Right Stuff came out in 1983, and so obviously all these contemporary other ways of distributing a thing weren't there, and so
I mean there was Roots, but you couldn't do a huge budget on a huge budget space epic on television.
Yeah,
and it had to be a feature film, and
to try to maintain a certain trueness to the book, we're going to have to try to get the sort of bigger epic story. Whereas I think if they could have focused down a little bit, it would have been a better film. So I'm going to come right out and say it. I mean, I recognize The Right Stuff as having sort of an iconic place in space movie history. And I know that a lot of people are quite fond of it. And but watching it this time, it just did really not grab me. It's aged poorly. It has some structural issues where they kept, maybe because Sam Shepard was at the peak of his movie star career and he was playing Chuck Yeager, they keep cutting back to Chuck Yeager throughout the whole darn movie.
Well, I mean, I think that...
And it just, I didn't think that really... I mean, I understand in some cases they're trying to play off his role and how he didn't become an astronaut and whatever, but it just, to me, that was just wasted screen time, cutting away from the astronauts to show Chuck Yeager kind of standing around looking up at the sky. I didn't quite get that.
Well, I do happen to know some of the background on this, because William Goldman, Academy Award-winning screenwriter, best known for The Princess Bride, was the first screenwriter hired on to adapt Tom Wolfe's book, and he covered a lot of this in his. William Goldman covered this in his book Adventures in the Screen Trade about his work on the film, and he had decided, okay, to make this into a film, we have to cut out Chuck Yeager. And we just start with the Mercury 7, and go through that, the training, the launches, and all that. And then Philip Kaufman was hired on as the director, and he said, no, I think it's got to be, he was apparently a big aviation and fighter pilot fan, and he was like, no, this should really be about Chuck Yeager and about how he really had the right stuff, and how the Mercury astronauts were just kind of has-been. Not put so harshly, but
yeah,
they didn't quite have what Chuck Yeager had, so that's why you have Chuck Yeager, riding in on his horse and saying, he busts his ribs, and he goes, I can't let them know I bust my ribs, or they're not going to let me go up on the plane, and...
That explains it then, yeah, because I'm with William Goldman on this. That to make the film, I mean, not to
diminish anything that Yeager did.
Yeah, because he obviously has played a historic role in the program,
right? But
as far as trying to make a film from a giant book, yeah, it would have made much more sense to cut him out.
And then. Not only did they have the entire, it's 40 minutes of before they even get to the Sputnik launch.
Yeah.
But even at that, they keep going back to him. And then they keep going back to him.
Yeah, and it just doesn't make sense.
There's a whole lot of storytelling choices in that film that I question.
Yeah, another one that I question was they try to inject little humorous bits throughout the film, and there's a running joke where like the Russians do something else, and then we cut to this guy running down the halls of some government building, and he bursts into a room to exclaim whatever the Russians have done, and there's a group of people sitting around the table, and they say, yeah, we know.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, obviously they know. That's why they're having this meeting. They wouldn't all be gathered there unless they were having a meeting because of this incident that's happened. And so this guy that's suddenly running to burst in and to say what's happened is at least, 2 days behind schedule. And so it makes, it's nonsensical, and it's done solely as a joke. And it's like, if you're just going to make up nonsensical things to make a joke I was just scratching my head at that. It was ridiculous.
No. Yeah, it was absolutely just it was injecting humor into the movie, where it's like, did you really need to inject humor into it?
No.
Like,
and then you have Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum.
Harry Shearer and Jeff Goldblum doing,
like
Abbott and Costello or whatever.
Yeah, that was
showing stock footage of carnival acrobats and human cannonballs. And
I realize that I'm not a fan of Right Stuff, so I probably should be preparing for Dayton Ward to bust in and punch me right in the mouth. But I'm sorry, buddy. It hasn't aged well. The humor, there's iconic scenes in it.
Yes.
The scene where the astronauts see the Mercury capsule for the first time, and there's not a window, and they play against the scientists saying that they're going to go to the press that are right there. That's an enjoyable scene. And there are some enjoyable character scenes here and there in the movie, like when there's a big press conference and someone asks, who's going to be the first man in orbit or whatever, and all the astronauts raise their hands. So there's these moments that are justifiably seared into one's mind, but
Ed Harris as John Glenn, I thought was really fantastic.
Yes.
It's watching the film. There's no question why Ed Harris has become one of the better character actors that we have today. His scenes with his wife, who has the speech impediment,
That's some very nice stuff.
Very nice stuff, and where he gets on the phone with his wife and says, "You tell Lyndon Johnson."
Yeah.
Don't you dare step a foot in this house.
Yeah, and John Glenn said so.
Glenn said so.
That's a very satisfying scene. It is weird though. Then it's weird to watch The Right Stuff and Apollo 13 close together, because then there's Ed Harris back playing a different character, and it's a little confusing.
But I thought where you were going to go was, you also have a very similar scene with Jim Lovell's wife and the press officers and these reporters. You tell them they can't set a foot on our property, and if they want, they can talk to my husband. He'll be back on Monday.
Yeah, and so there is, just by its nature, they have to cover some of the same ground and some of the same scenes. And I mean, even some of those scenes, even if they're repeats, they probably did. I mean, there's always fictionalization that goes on, but some of those scenes probably did happen in real life, much the same way, playing out, because all these people got put through the same ringer with the crazy media being on their lawns, and then there was a similar scene in Apollo 13 when things went bad, that then the wife was demanding answers, much like happened in First Man when things went bad on the docking flight, and she couldn't get answers.
And they just switched off the
special feed.
And she had to go marching down to NASA headquarters saying, "What's going on here?"
So speaking about fictionalization, it would be interesting to dig deeper into this, and we didn't have time to do it certainly on First Man because we just saw the movie. But so in Apollo 13, when we see the Apollo 1 capsule fire, there's this dramatic shot where you see a spacesuited hand of one of the astronauts hit up against a window of the capsule.
Right.
But when we see the same incident in First Man, there's this extra external hatch that's over the hatch that has a window in it. And you just get this shot where you see that hatch kind of jolt with the explosion and fire. And so it was purely a dramatic thing in Apollo 13 to show a shot through the window. My guess is that First Man portrayed it more realistically.
I think so too.
Than Apollo 13.
Because Apollo 13, it was just, this was a quick bit of background, and it was like a 30-second scene. And so it really made it more, instantly jolting to see a hand hit a window, as opposed to just, well, not just, but as opposed to the way that they portrayed it in First Man.
Well, I mean,
it was very powerfully moving in First Man, but that's because it was an entire scene.
Yeah, and you build up more. In First Man, you're in the capsule much longer. You're seeing the men trying to, you're seeing them react to the fire as the fire spreads, and so you're more connected to them. So when they cut to that external shot and you see that hatch just vibrate with an explosion, you're still feeling so connected to those guys inside. You're just thinking, man, they just got, blasted. This is awful. And so to me, it was almost a little bit more of a punch than seeing the hand go up against the window, which is a little bit of an easier emotional shot.
Yeah, but it's very much a shortcut, an emotional shortcut, an omen of what's to come with the Apollo 13 mission. Whereas opposed to First Man, Neil and Gus knew each other. Yeah. They were in the program. They came into the program together, and there was also the piece in that comes out in First Man, which I did not know, or I do not know if is actually historically accurate, but Gus Grissom was the one that they wanted to be the first man on the moon.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, and so that gives it a whole other piece of emotional weight where, you know, this is a friend of Neil Armstrong's.
Yeah.
This is a friend that he believes is going to be the first man on the moon, and then he gets that, you know, historical distinction through his death.
That is a moving thing about the whole program. You know, these guys came up together and trained together, and then there were various deaths along the way. Less dramatic than the death, there was the story in Apollo 13 where the one guy was exposed to the measles, and so he gets held back because they're afraid if he comes down with the measles, he's going to be sick while he's in space. And so he's right on the eve of going to the moon, and he doesn't get to go.
And he gets grounded.
But then, of course, the guys don't make it to the moon because there's the mishap with Apollo 13, and then he ends up being, as portrayed in the film at least, instrumental in helping get them home. And so then it kind of makes you wonder if the roles had been switched, would the other guy that went in his place, would he have been as good in the troubleshooting role back on Earth? You don't know.
Yeah.
And so that's
in Apollo 13, they do a, you know, Lavelle is giving an interview about his most harrowing experience. You know, this is something that had been done before the flight, and he's, you know, during the war, I was coming into an aircraft carrier, and my systems all went down, and I was flying blind, and I couldn't find the aircraft carrier, and then all the lights inside of my cockpit went out, and I thought that was disaster. I'm going down. I'm going to die now. And then he saw the luminescent algae in the water, and he says, if the lights hadn't failed, I wouldn't have seen this other way to direct me directly to the ship. And that's a very close parallel to, you know, if, you know, Gary Sinise's character had not been grounded, he wouldn't have been there to help bring the crippled capsule back.
Yeah, it's crazy. The other thing that's crazy,
whether how much of that is real and how much of that is Hollywood screenwriting magic.
Another thing that the movies bring home, and I thought this worked really well in First Man, is when you just talk about it, especially maybe younger people that aren't as familiar with the actual hardware, and you just talk about, oh, you went in a spaceship to the moon, cool, whatever. But if you really look at the capsules from 40, 50 years ago, you realize how incredibly primitive they are.
Yes.
You know, and so when you have a movie and you get these close-up shots and you can just see all the screws and rivets and seams and stuff, and you just think, man, these people are just, you know, in these tin cans. There's like nothing to them. Or in the opening scenes of First Man when he's in the X-15, and the thing is so thin that there's a shot, and I'm assuming this is probably realistic. You're going so fast, there's so much friction, the body of the aircraft is starting to heat up, and there's a shot that sort of looks down beneath his feet, and there you can actually see a glow coming up.
Right,
through the whatever little bit of superstructure there is between where his feet are on the pedals, the control pedals, and then where the actual external skin of the aircraft is.
Yeah, and of course, all through that scene, you're also hearing, you know, the wavering of what sounds like a single sheet of aluminum, and little pops. There's like, you know, it sounds like they're rivets popping, or or whether it's overheating because of the friction or whatnot. But it's all these we're going to die sounds that if you heard these while you were on your Delta flight to New York, you would go, this is the end.
If you've ever had a chance to go to the Smithsonian or something and see some of the capsules that they have, you just can't believe it. It looks like you could have made it in your backyard. We've breezed through a lot of the film. Before we get to the final scenes of First Man, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Something that really struck me is, as opposed to, The Right Stuff, especially, where it was very much about the victories of the space race.
Yeah.
In The First Man, it was really not depicted that way. It was really more focused on why are we spending all this money to send people to the moon when there's so much that can be done down here on Earth. And, you didn't really feel that, you and I, as lifelong space nuts, have always had this love of the Apollo missions.
Yeah.
And this really seemed to depict it as something that was really tearing the country apart as much as Vietnam was. And it's not until the very final scenes where you see the celebrations around the world that you really get a sense that, people really wanted us, or people really thought getting to the moon was a worthwhile venture.
Yeah, I agree that in First Man they gave much more voice to the opposition, if you will. I don't think the film itself overall really endorsed that view. It allowed that, very real feeling that a lot of people had to be there. But when people would question, like if people were talking to Neil Armstrong and they would question it, even through his, stoic reserve of his character, I would get the feeling that he would look at those people like, what, are you nuts? It's like he couldn't even understand. And maybe I'm just reading this in, but his reaction to that, I felt was that he didn't understand why people would even question it. It's like, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. But he wasn't,
But because
he was not very vocal about that is probably why I got the impression that I didn't, and that's also, what contributed to that is, the scene right before Neil leaves his family to go to Canaveral. And it's not, we're so excited for you, you're going to be the first man on the moon. It's, you're probably going to die. Don't you want to tell your kids goodbye before you go off to die?
Yeah. So
hey, kids, I'm going to go to the moon. And I might not, he was a military veteran. He was a war veteran. He knew that, going off into something that was dangerous but worthwhile was not a brand new experience for him. And it just felt that was just given way more focus and, not leavened with any kind of positivity, or, not enough positivity, at least in my mind.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a perfectly valid takeaway. I don't think it bothered me as much as it did you, at least on this first viewing, but I completely get where you're coming from, because there wasn't a vocal, rah-rah component from some of the other characters and to, of course, counterbalance that.
And of course, I also want to just point out that I'm not with the contingent that were upset that there was not an American flag planting scene in this movie.
No, that I didn't. I was kind of wondering how I was going to feel about that after reading, because on the one hand, I thought clearly this just seems like the nut jobs overreacting. I think that would have been a problem. Well, first we have to talk about the two different kinds of problems. There's the problem about just talking about film and storytelling. And then there's the problem where people are just coming at it from a super patriotic kind of place. And so for me, it's not
either super patriotic or just wanting to be confrontational for the sake of being confrontational.
Yes. And for me, from a film structure and storytelling point of view, it would have been a problem if they had devoted more screen minutes to them on the moon. But they did not give a lot of time to them on the moon. And so it wasn't going to be a tick the box of everything that happened on the moon. The movie's called First Man, so in many ways the most significant scene was that first step onto the moon.
I don't think we even saw Buzz Aldrin on the moon.
And then,
or if we did, it was like for about 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think there was one shot of him sort of hopping along. And so it wasn't about that. And it's also not like you never saw the flag. Then, there was a wider shot where you did see the flag. And this brings us to the one thing that I just checked. Fact versus fiction. Because the emotional closure of this film, as it's told, is a scene where Neil Armstrong walks off by himself to a crater, and then it's revealed that he has a little bracelet with his deceased daughter's name on it, and he drops it into the crater, leaves it on the moon, and you see him almost at his most, like the second most emotional you've ever seen him. There's one scene earlier in the film where he breaks down and cries alone in a room. And in here, it looked like he was tearing up at this final moment. And it serves as kind of as a closure to the pain he's carried out of his daughter's death through the whole story. And I was really wondering, is that real? Because
and I'm waiting to find out from you now.
It seems like very perfect from a storytelling point of view. Well, so I looked it up. All they know is that Neil went off plan and went by himself and stood by that crater alone for a period of time. Apparently, he never otherwise deviated from whatever they were doing. But this one time, he went off by himself and spent some time at that crater. But as per the kind of person he was, he never spoke about it really afterward. So his biographer asked some of his family members what they thought he did there and if he might have left something there and if they thought that he might have brought something of the daughters with him to the moon. A lot of the astronauts, I mean, even before they went to the moon, you would take things along with you into space.
Right.
Mementos, sometimes as curios to then be able to sell afterward. We won't get into that sidebar. Google it. None of them know what he did there. His sister apparently really liked the idea of thinking that he brought something of the daughters with him. But she doesn't know. So he went there alone. We can only surmise that he was thinking about his daughter.
Right.
That he was reflecting upon that.
As a movie moment, it's a very touching movie moment.
It's a perfect movie moment, and if you think of the story just as a story and not think about it being based on a true story, it's a very satisfying scene to put that little end on this pain. But it is a fictionalized scene from... It leaps off from reality that he did go and spend time there alone and did something that he never shared with anyone. So I think it's easy to say that it was an emotional time for him that he spent there, but they don't know what he did, but his family members think that it's possible that he had something with him and maybe even left it there. They think it's possible, but what in the little quick bit that I read, it also seemed more like wishful thinking on the part of his sister, that it had something to do with the daughter. I have very mixed feelings about how much you fictionalize a true story.
Like you, and I'm sure like probably 90% of the people who go see this, they're wondering, well, is that real? Or is that something that they just completely made up for the movie? And how much, and how much do you really want to accept of that kind of poetic license in such a important historical reenactment.
Yeah.
When I saw that, my initial reaction was, that seems like something that was imagined. I would have been very surprised if, while you were there looking up online, that you had discovered, oh yes, he did bring that bracelet to the moon with him to leave in a crater.
Yeah.
And just like when I'm looking at The Right Stuff, there are scenes in The Right Stuff that we know were invented, but unless you're going to go and watch the documentaries or read the Wikipedia page, you're not going to realize that, and you're going to accept this as fact. So
that's the big question for any historical film. Just the nature of the medium and the time constraints. You have to make changes. You have to gloss over things, or one thing that's very commonly done is lines from 4 or 5 people are just given to one character in a film, things so that you can tell the story in a reasonable amount of time. And so you're always left wondering these things. And especially when it was something so emotionally pivotal to the story as presented, it really did seem too perfect. It brought, so much clarity to a person who was so often hard to get into his mind. I think the biographer had said that if he had been making the film, he wouldn't have made the choice to show the bracelet, even though it was the biographer who raised the idea.
Yeah, and the fact that, his family liked the idea of some memento of the daughter. And I did notice in the end credits that his family members were, acknowledged as, having played some kind of part in the film. That makes me feel a little bit better about the film choice of putting that in there.
Yeah.
If it was something that the screenwriter had decided to throw in there just for the emotional punch of it, I would have been a bit more upset about it.
Yeah. Unless you have a heart of stone, you are going to, like the family, say to yourself, oh, I hope that's true.
Yeah.
It would be very satisfying if it were true. Well, there's one more scene left after the bracelet scene, because they get back to Earth. They're still in quarantine, and Neil's wife comes to see him in quarantine, and they play the scene in a very, it fits with his character.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like smile and jump up and down and oh my gosh and throw themselves against the glass. It's very subdued. You just get the sense that they're just kind of overwhelmed about everything that's happened. And then there's just a couple very quiet little moments where you see their love for each other in a very underplayed way. I'm assuming that maybe that scene didn't work for you because it really is a microcosm of the whole film of his.
Exactly. Underplayed is the word that I would give to almost the entire film. I mean, it's one thing to say this was a very reserved man who very few people got to really know in real life. You need to give a movie audience something. Instead of just, there was, going back a couple of scenes where he's first on the moon, and he has the gold visor down on his helmet. And I was watching that, and they do a long scene of 360 pan of him standing with the gold plate over his face. And it was like, that is really no different from any of the other facial emotional acting that he's done in the film.
Oh man.
And I'm sure it was probably a directorial choice that they didn't want to see him looking in awe at the lunar landscape and taking in the fact that here I am, the first man to ever stand on an alien body, but it was just like really no different than Ryan Gosling's emotionless face.
I get where you're coming from. But as I said earlier, it kind of worked for me, but I understand it places a lot of hurdles between the audience and the character, and it's a very strange choice, especially compared to the other films. So we had The Right Stuff from 1983 and Apollo 13 from 1995. And so let's just kind of do a quick recap here. So, Mr. Leisner, if you were going to give a grade or a stars, use your rating scale of choice, what do you think of The Right Stuff upon viewing it now?
The Right Stuff, it's a good film. It tried to be a great film and didn't quite make it.
Okay.
It did not. It has not aged particularly well. There are a whole lot of odd choices made by the director and screenwriter that it's totally all over the place with, the comic digressions, and then the Aborigines in Australia having some kind of connection to the fireflies around Glenn's capsule. The whole metaphysical thing, which there was a scientific explanation for those fireflies. That was debris coming off and burning off the capsule. And then you have the final scene where you're intercutting the celebration at the Astrodome with this erotic fan dance intercut with Chuck Yeager hitting this fixed wing altitude record, I believe, is what that was about. And it's really all over the place. But I think that there are enough nice pieces in there, and taking into account, how Hollywood was working in the late 70s, early 80s with the whole auteur thing that was going on at that point in time. I mean, it's a film worth seeing. So I would probably give it a let's say a B- C+.
I actually think that's about where I would fall with it now. And it is kind of an iconic film, and the novel it was based on was a big hit in the time, and so it certainly has its place. And if you're a space program buff at all, it's certainly a movie that you have to see. And it's elevated here and there by some really great performances and some solid casting. But yeah, it has not aged well, and the screenplay didn't quite find where it was, what movie it was making.
Yeah, it really feels like a movie that was made in the editing room rather than at the screenplay stage.
Yeah.
I think that they probably had, like I said before, they had a lot more movie that they chopped down to the current state that it is.
Okay. And so then let's move to Apollo 13. What do you think of that movie?
Apollo 13 is probably one of my favorite movies. Probably, top 20 at the very least.
Wow. Okay.
I saw it in the theaters when it first came out, and watching it again recently, it's tightly written. It feels real. The fact that they had filmed it in the vomit comets for the weightlessness effects. The fact that they were able to pull that off in the not quite pre-CGI era, but it was like 99% all practical effects in that. And the performances, it's a tight story, and I give it an A.
When you think about it being 1995, so it's over 20 years old.
Yeah.
And it seems just as solid now as it did when it came out.
It does not have the aging issues that The Right Stuff does.
Because it's a more focused story, you get to sort of inhabit the characters a little bit more, so that's nice compared to the there's so many things that have to go on in the right stuff. You get you just get these snapshots, and so it's nice to just really sit down and experience the Apollo 13 mission, and you're just there with those three guys in that ship. I would definitely give it an A as well. I mean, I could sit down and watch that movie again right now.
Yes.
I watched it last night. I just watched it the night before First Man. I could sit and watch it right now. I could never really imagine myself going back and watching The Right Stuff again in its entirety. I might watch a great scene here and there if I, flipped into it on TV, but it just does not grab me. As emotional as I am about the space program, it doesn't grab me in the same way that Apollo 13 does.
Right.
Because one thing that hits me in all of these films is I've been to Kennedy Space Center, and so I've seen a lot of the locations up close. And so that adds this extra level for me when I watch these movies, where it's just like, well, yeah, I watched, I was standing right there. I walked right across, they have one of those gantries, the red gantries that the astronauts would walk across.
Mm-hmm.
They have one of those just on the ground that you can get up and walk across, and just doing that is emotional for me. And so when you watch some of these things recreated on film, especially the newer the film is and the better the effects are, it's so amazing to just be put in those locations. But okay, then moving on to our final thoughts on First Man. Well, I guess we don't have to do much about thoughts, but we can just do the grades. So what grade would you give it?
I mean, I don't want to grade it too low because it is a very well-made movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it looks great. It sounds great. It's. I was bothered a lot by the handheld camera. Really felt overused. And I really don't feel that I know Neil Armstrong better for having seen this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that was the point, that nobody knew who this man was inside. I hate to come down hard on it, having, only a couple of hours to reflect on it. But, I don't think I can give it higher than a C. Wow.
I say wow only because... Well, actually, I don't know why I say wow, because I think it was clear in your discussion about it. Since, right at the top, I saw your tepid response. I would give it a much higher grade, even though I acknowledge that it has these problems. And one thing, like when I said I would watch Apollo 13 again right now, I don't know how much rewatchability First Man will have for me. As much as I found it compelling and emotional, the emotions came through the story, not through the character of Neil Armstrong, because he is, such a sort of wall. And so the emotions for me came from reliving these events in the space program that I feel so much nostalgia for. So there's a lot of projection that goes onto this film that you bring with you, and in some ways Neil is like this blank canvas upon which you're going to put your own feelings, because he's such an inaccessible character. And because he's so inaccessible, will I watch it over and over in the same way that I could find myself watching Apollo 13? Because obviously when you're watching Tom Hanks as John Lovell, that's a very accessible and likable character. So on the one hand, I feel like while I was watching the film, part of me just wants to say, well, that was A. That was an A grade. That was a finely produced, crafted film. I enjoyed his understated performance of a man who is known for being a very internal, quiet, reflective man. But I really wonder if I watch it again here and there over the next 10, 15, 20 years, would I do it the same amount as I did with Apollo 13? I don't know. When you come back and look at it, down the road, what will it be? Will it have come down Will I say, well, no, that's more of a B because what is it with this Neil Armstrong guy? I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's like, like you, I am a child of the Apollo era,
Yeah.
and I have a lot of love for the history of the space program
Mhm.
and the moon landing, and why I gave the right stuff as high a grade that I did, but that was not enough to really carry me through this movie and to get me over the difficulty I had connecting with the Armstrong character. I'm certainly not saying do not go see this movie if you are interested in seeing this movie. I mean, the scenes on the moon and the scenes of him piloting the test lander are
Yeah,
just technically excellent.
when you get into those more technical scenes, technical both from a filmmaking standpoint and from the fact that you're talking about experimental hardware of the space program, you feel the fear and the chaos and that's going on for those characters in those moments, because the direction, the editing, the sound mixing. I mean, you are just in those capsules, and it's quite stunning. But then as far as character payoff, not so much.
Yeah, it's all the emotion comes through the technical pieces of the film.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't, I'm not going to ding Ryan Gosling for it because obviously he had to work with the script that he had. But the emotion didn't really come through in performances.
Yeah, it's a film that will probably be kind of a divisive reaction. And I'm back, this time with Ella, who is Skyping in from 6 hours in the future from London.
Ooh.
What's up?
Not much. It's nighttime.
So you recently had the opportunity to attend a premiere party for Doctor Who.
I did.
So how did that all come to be?
You called me the day before the day of the premiere, and you were like, Doctor Who premieres tomorrow. Like, where are you going to see it? And I was like, Doctor Who premieres tomorrow? Where am I going to see it? And then the next morning, I found the only premiere party in like all of London and got on the wait list, and a couple people weren't able to go, so I was confirmed for the event about 3 minutes after it started. And I put on my jacket and ran to the tube, and then ran from the tube to a pub it's in the city center, but it's around lots of like offices. It's like a very old building in the middle of like a bunch of very new buildings. And I climbed up a very like, the like tiny British staircases.
Yes.
Like the building just goes up forever. So I climbed up that to like the third floor and found a room full of nerds.
Some of them in disguise.
Some of them in disguise.
I have to explain that. One of the fun things about this party was that it was covered by a reporter from the famous French newspaper Le Monde.
Yeah.
And when I ran a translation software to get from the French of the article, instead of saying that people were in costume, it said they were in disguise.
Yeah.
But I jump ahead. So there you were. Were you the only American in the crowd?
No, there were two other American girls, one who had just moved to London from the US in January for her and her husband's jobs, and a friend of that girl who had taken a trip to London, sort of to see her friend, but mostly to be able to watch the Doctor Who premiere in London.
Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, they were very sweet. I talked to them a lot.
And what did you think of the 13th Doctor?
I liked it. I mean, that first episode is so hard.
Yeah.
Because, especially just because of the way Doctor Who is, it's so outlandish that you have to sort of brush past your like ensemble cast being like, oh, you're an alien who just regenerated and you have a new face and two hearts? Okay, like, take a nap on my couch. Sleep it off, bro.
Yep, everyone just rolls with it.
Everyone rolls with it. So I'm very excited to see her in an episode that's a little bit more like meaty. Like, I really want them to get into it with her. If that makes sense, I'm very, very excited that it's a lady, and
Yes.
I hope that they write some really fantastic episodes for her to just knock out of the park.
I've been enjoying it. I've seen the other episodes.
Yeah, I haven't watched any of the other ones yet.
The second one, very likable. Not the most original of plots, but entertaining, and all the characters are also likable and interesting. And then the third one, that is a Rosa Parks episode, is really quite moving and educational in a way, and really sort of stretches what you can do in the Doctor Who format, that you can do these sort of important episodes dealing with historical reality, and not just be off in various crazy places around the universe. And so it's off to a solid start this new season. I want to go back though to some of your adventures at the party, because it was amusing in the Le Monde report. The reporter does refer to the pub's bartender as being surly.
That is so funny. He was the classic surly British bartender. When I walked in, he was sitting at a table, and I was kind of like, I'm here for the Doctor Who party, and he was just kind of like upstairs. And then I went back down before it started, because I'm of age here. So I was like, I'm in a pub. We're gonna watch Doctor Who. I'm getting a pint of cider because I'm not, a man's man.
Plenty of men drink cider.
Plenty of gluten intolerant men drink cider. So I went back down, the like 3 flights of stairs or whatever. He was coming up, just starting to come up to the stairs when I got to the very bottom, and so he kind of stepped out of my way, but then like hesitated because I just kind of bounced onto the ground floor and kind of stood there, and he was like asking if I was looking for the bathroom, and I was like, no, I was just gonna order a drink. And he like literally, because he was bringing food, he like literally sighed and like turned and set the food down, and I was kind of like, you can finish like what you're doing first if you want. And he was like, no. And he like got behind the bar, and I was like, just a pint of cider, like it would be great. And he was like, all right. And he starts filling up a pint glass, and I'm just like twiddling my thumbs, like looking around it's like, it's weird enough for me to be like ordering a drink in a bar, and like the bartender was the British bartender in every pub. And so like 10 seconds go by, and he's like, well, we just ran out of this, but I have a bottled fruit cider. And I was like, oh, that'd be great. And he
was drawing it from the tap.
Yeah. And so he has a pint glass that's like, I don't know, not that, like, not even a quarter the way full, probably, of cider. And so he turns away from the tap, and then he just drinks that all in one go. Like, all of it down the hatch. And then he sets the glass down, and he goes into the fridge to get my, like, bottle. And what kills me here is sometimes I'll order a drink, and the bartender looks at me, and just by looking at me can tell that I want a straw, which I don't know what kind of dark, like black magic that is, but I appreciate it. And so he gives me this like glass of fruit. He put blueberries in it. He was very like, because he didn't seem like, yeah, he wasn't like mad. Like I wasn't like irritated that he like sighed at me. It was just like so funny. And then then he like put blueberries in a straw in like my drink for me and gave it to me. Yeah, he was very I think surly is the right word. He was pretty funny. I think he also didn't really know. It's like when you have like 25 Doctor Who nerds in your party room, like watching Doctor Who like it's a football game.
And there was lots of raucous cheering and applause and such during the actual show.
Yes, very much so.
And was there any? But you got there just in the nick of time, right? Because
I did.
I was going to ask if there had been anything beforehand, if they had been like doing trivia or stuff like that, but you probably just rushed in at the last moment.
I rushed in. I got there about, I think, 20 minutes before it actually started. And no, people were just kind of hanging out. The journalist was kind of talking to people. There was one guy that was like live streaming to Australia for some reason. But people were just kind of hanging out. Yeah, and like a lot of the people there were there for the first time, and so they were like, because it's like this Doctor Who meetup group, and so they were like, everyone was like introducing themselves and stuff. So yeah, it was fun. It was cute.
And didn't you tell me that you spoke with the live streamer guy?
Yeah, after the episode, he was talking to the people near me, and then he kind of turned to me and was like, "So, like, what did you think?" And I was like, "It was great. Hi, Australia. It was great." I don't know how many people were on that live stream, but yeah.
But here's the hilarious thing. So you get to go to a Doctor Who premiere party in London. So that's really cool because it's, the classic, it's the classic British TV series. You're getting to see it in London. But then all of a sudden, you're both getting interviewed for Le Monde in Paris, France, and live streaming to Australia.
Yes.
I wish we could get it was a live stream, but I wonder if it got recorded as well. It was like hilarious.
A Periscope or something, but I don't even know how to
where it was going.
Begin to find the exact one. Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, and who was it going to? Was it going to a crowd of people? Was it just going to the guy's buddy? Do you have any idea?
No clue at all. No idea what was going on. He was just like, "We're live streaming to Australia," and everybody was like, "Hey," and I was like, "Pardon? Excuse me?"
So yet another amazing adventure. I say another. Yeah, I say another, although the others haven't been spoken about. But if people turn in for the next episode, then they'll get even more of your amazing adventures.
And keep tuning in, because tomorrow I'm going on a zombie pub crawl.
Is that true?
That is 100% true. It's going to be straight Shaun of the Dead. I don't go out to bars, so it's going to be a new experience for me. But when the dress code is like you're only allowed in if you're like zombie-fied, then I'm there. So me and my roommate and a few of her friends are going. So I think it's gonna be there's gonna be one other American there.
And I'm sure that we'll get to see some pictures and selfies.
Oh, absolutely. If I'm gonna see at least 5 people dressed as Simon Pegg from Shaun of the Dead, and if I don't, I'm going to be disappointed. I mean, borderline, I should go like to Primark tomorrow and buy like a red tie and a collared shirt and like, oh my god, I kind of want to do that now.
You might have to.
Oh my god, should I dress up as Simon Pegg?
Well, you can't go wrong. I have to add some pictures to the Generations Geek website. From your various adventures so that people can see them when they go there.
Yeah, everyone follow us on everything to see all the cool pictures of me.
All right. Was there anything else from the Doctor Who premiere party that you wanted to point out?
I don't think so. It happened very fast and it was very quick. I left pretty much right afterwards and walked to the tube station with the 2 other American girls. There's going to be another party for the finale at least, so I'm going to have to figure out how to watch Doctor Who so I can go to that. But yeah, everyone stay tuned.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Bill will return in a couple of months to discuss his books, including his Star Trek stories and novels. Tune in next time for episode 51, An American Geek in London, as Ella Skypes in from England for an entire show to tell us about visiting a major J.R.R. Tolkien art exhibit in Oxford, as well as all of her adventures at the huge Destination Star Trek convention in Birmingham. Remember that Generations Geek is a part of the Chronic Rift Network, which broadcasts from a red carpet full of Star Trek actors. Please give their other fine podcasts a listen at chronicrift.com. Thanks for listening, and come back next time.
No geeks were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Ooh, shiny.